Open wide, soldier. Take the money like a good little guard. That's what the rich tourist whispered as he pressed rolled-up bills against Royal Guard Rupert Allerton's lips. But seconds later, it was the tourist himself choking on currency, learning a lesson about respect he'd never forget. So how did a disciplined guard, known for standing motionless for hours, suddenly snap into action? Before we reveal that, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The black Aston Martin screeched to a halt outside Buckingham Palace, drawing irritated glances from tourists. Oliver didn't notice, or rather, didn't care. The 25-year-old heir to a British tech fortune slammed his car door and tossed his keys to a parking attendant, along with a crumpled £50 note. "Try not to scratch it," he called out with a smirk, "though I suppose if you do, Daddy will just buy me another." The attendant's face remained blank, but his eyes betrayed contempt. Money had always been Oliver's shortcut to compliance, his weapon against the word no. From teachers to nightclub bouncers, everyone had their price. At least, that had been his experience for 25 privileged years. Oliver sauntered toward the palace gates, designer sunglasses perched on his styled hair. He cut through the queue of tourists with practiced entitlement, dropping a £20 note when he knocked over a child's ice cream. "Buy two," he said, without slowing down. Oliver's impatience grew with each passing minute. He slipped money to a tour guide for a better position, paid a security officer to expedite his passage, and pushed past an elderly couple with nothing more than a dismissive wave. "Do you know who my father is?" he asked, when the elderly man objected. Oliver didn't wait for an answer, leaving a crumpled note in the man's pocket. "There's your apology." It was then that Oliver spotted him. A royal guard standing at perfect attention, his scarlet tunic a vibrant contrast to the ancient stone behind him. Unlike others Oliver had encountered, this guard showed no recognition of his presence, no eye movement, no shift in stance, nothing but absolute discipline. Staff Sergeant Rupert Allerton had been at his post since 0600 hours, trained through years of military service to maintain perfect composure. The bearskin cap added to his imposing height, and beneath it, his face remained expressionless, a mask perfected through thousands of hours of practice. But Rupert was far more than the ceremonial statue tourists came to photograph. Before his assignment to the Queen's Guard, Rupert had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. His reputation had been complicated, an effective fighter whose aggression occasionally crossed lines. The incident that led to his reassignment involved an interrogation that employed methods that left his superiors with difficult questions. Rather than ending his career, they assigned him to ceremonial duty, partly as discipline, partly as rehabilitation. The extreme precision required of the Queen's Guard was meant to temper the fire that burned too hot within him. For 18 months, it had worked. Rupert had found peace in the rigid protocols and absolute discipline. The man once known for his explosive temperament now stood as a model of control, but beneath the perfectly pressed uniform, the old Rupert remained, dormant but not extinct. Oliver circled the guard, waving a hand in front of his face. "Hello? Anyone home?" he called with his upper-class accent. When Rupert's expression remained unchanged, Oliver's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see how good you really are," he murmured, extracting a crisp £20 note. "I've always wondered," Oliver announced loudly, "what's the going rate for making one of you toy soldiers smile?" He dangled the note before Rupert's face like bait. "Is this enough, or are you holding out for more?" Rupert's eyes remained fixed on a point in the distance, reciting protocols in his mind. The bearskin cap weighed heavily in the summer heat, but he had endured worse in Afghanistan. Compared to tracking enemy movements in Helmand province, standing guard was practically a holiday. "Not impressed by 20, Oliver continued, replacing it with a 50. Perhaps the Queen's Guard requires a more royal sum. He leaned closer. £50 just to blink. Better than your wage, isn't it? A small crowd gathered, drawn by Oliver's performance. Among them, an elderly man with a Royal Marines veteran pin watched with disapproval. A family of American tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Oh, come on," Oliver sighed. "Everyone has a price. The doorman at the Ritz, that police officer last weekend, all it took was the right number." He circled Rupert again. "What's yours?" The £50 note was joined by more. Oliver fanned them out, waving them before Rupert's eyes. £150 for a simple smile. Are you going to turn it down? In his mind, Rupert recited his former unit members' names, an exercise for trying moments. He had stood firm through rain, snow, verbal abuse, and countless provocations. This entitled young man was nothing new. Oliver's frustrated expression suggested he wasn't accustomed to being ignored. He stuffed the notes into the breast pocket of Rupert's tunic, his fingers deliberately wrinkling the immaculate uniform. "Consider it a down payment," he said, voice hardening. "I'm quite determined to purchase a reaction from you before I leave. Everything and everyone in this city is for sale. You're no different." The veteran had inched closer, his weathered face set in lines of concern. He recognized something in Rupert's stance that most civilians would miss, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw, the slight whitening of knuckles on the ceremonial rifle. Small tells that spoke volumes to anyone who had served. £200, Oliver declared, extracting more notes from his wallet. His initial amusement had shifted to something uglier, more determined. £200 for you to say just one word, anything at all. Hello. Goodbye. Oliver's a handsome devil. Your choice. When Rupert remained motionless, Oliver's smile tightened. Fine, 300 then. He began tucking notes into various parts of Rupert's uniform, the collar, the cuffs, even attempting to slide one beneath the strap of his bearskin cap. Each invasion of space was deliberately provocative, testing boundaries with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. "You know," Oliver continued, addressing the growing audience as much as Rupert, "my father always says that dignity is just another commodity that hasn't been properly priced yet." He pulled out £500 notes, holding them up for all to see. £500. That's what, a week's salary? 2 weeks? All for breaking character for 5 seconds. A woman in the crowd muttered, "Disgraceful," under her breath. Oliver caught it and turned, his eyes narrowing. "Something to say, love? Perhaps you'd like to explain the noble purpose of grown men playing dress-up, while actual power is wielded in boardrooms and bank accounts?" The woman fell silent, but the veteran stepped forward. "Son, I think that's enough. Show some respect." Oliver's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Respect? For what? Standing still in ridiculous costumes? I respect people who actually do something in this world. People who build, create, influence, not those who stand around as decorations for tourist photos." He turned back to Rupert, whose expression hadn't changed, despite the growing litter of currency adorning his uniform. But those who looked closely, like the veteran, might have noticed a subtle change in his breathing, a controlled rhythm that combat soldiers use to manage adrenaline. "Let's raise the stakes," Oliver announced, extracting his entire remaining wallet and removing a thick stack of notes. £1,000, right here, right now. All you have to do is say one word, or smile, or even just nod your head. The money was now being held directly before Rupert's face, so close that the edges of the notes occasionally brushed against his skin with each of Oliver's gestures. The scent of fresh currency mingled with Oliver's cologne in an odour of wealth and entitlement. "I've never failed to buy what I wanted," Oliver said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Never. People, experiences, exceptions to rules. It's just a matter of finding the right figure. So what's yours, soldier boy? What's the magic number that turns you from a statue into a man?" Rupert's mind flashed briefly to the mountains of Afghanistan, where he'd once spent 3 days in a hidden position, tracking a high-value target while fighting off thirst, exhaustion, and the maddening itch of insect bites he couldn't scratch without revealing his location. If he could endure that, he could endure this peacock and his money. But Oliver was just getting started. "I'm starting to think you're not very smart," he whispered, leaning uncomfortably close to Rupert's ear. "Perhaps all that fancy discipline has replaced your capacity for basic calculation. £1,000 for seconds of effort." His breath was hot against Rupert's skin, carrying the faint scent of expensive scotch. "Or maybe you're just too afraid of breaking the precious rules, scared of what might happen if you step out of line." The crowd had grown, their collective discomfort palpable. Children were being ushered away by parents, while others watched with the reluctant fascination of witnesses to a car crash, unable to intervene, unwilling to leave. The veteran had positioned himself closer, his stance suggesting he was prepared to step in if necessary. "You know what I think?" Oliver continued, circling Rupert like a predator. "I think this whole guard business is just theatre for the peasants. A little pageantry to keep the tourists happy while the real world moves on without you." He plucked at Rupert's sleeve, deliberately disturbing the perfect alignment of his uniform. "Did they choose you because you're particularly good at standing still, or were you just too useless for actual military service?" That barb struck closer to home than Oliver could have known. Rupert's reassignment to ceremonial duty had initially felt like punishment, a demotion from the sharp edge of combat to what many soldiers derisively called parade ground duty. He had earned his reputation in the field, where split-second decisions meant life or death, where his aggression had been an asset rather than a liability. The memory of his commander's words still burned. "Allerton, your problem isn't that you're not a good soldier. Your problem is that sometimes you're too good at the wrong parts of the job." Oliver mistook Rupert's momentary reflection for submission. "Getting to you, am I? Good. Let's keep going." He extracted another bundle of notes from an inner pocket. £2,000 now. My final offer. Surely your precious protocol isn't worth turning that down. What would the Queen herself say? I suspect even Her Majesty has her price. The mention of the monarch sent a ripple of disapproval through the onlookers. Someone in the back of the crowd booed, quickly joined by others. Oliver spun toward them, his face flushing with anger. "Oh, shut up, the lot of you! You're all so caught up in tradition and ceremony that you can't see it for what it really is. A distraction, a pretty show while the world passes you by." He turned back to Rupert, jabbing a finger against the guard's chest. "This man isn't protecting anything real. He's a museum piece, an anachronism." Rupert remained motionless, but inside something had begun to shift. Not just anger at the insults, or frustration at the protocol that kept him from responding. It was a growing certainty that he was facing something he had encountered before in very different circumstances. An individual who wouldn't stop until forcibly checked. He had seen it in the eyes of certain fighters in Afghanistan, the ones who mistook restraint for weakness, who pushed and pushed until the response came with overwhelming force. Oliver began rolling several £100 notes into a tight cylinder, provocative in his movements. "Let's try something different," he said, holding up the roll like a weapon. "If money in your pocket won't do it, perhaps money somewhere else will." The veteran stepped forward. "That's enough. Back away now." "Mind your business, old man," Oliver snapped. "This is between me and Her Majesty's finest mannequin." He stepped closer to Rupert, their faces inches apart. The rolled money pressed against Rupert's cheek, sliding toward his mouth. "Open wide, soldier," Oliver whispered with cruelty. "Let's see if you can maintain that discipline with this between your lips." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The veteran's face had gone pale with anger, recognizing a line being crossed. "I said, back away," the veteran repeated with military command. But Oliver was committed now. The rolled bills pressed harder against Rupert's lips. "Come on, open up," Oliver taunted. "Take the money like a good little guard. Isn't that what you're here for? To take orders, to do as you're told." In that moment, something shifted in Rupert's eyes. It wasn't obvious. Nothing so dramatic as a change in his overall expression, just a subtle hardening. A focus that seemed to sharpen on Oliver's face with laser-like intensity. It was the look that Rupert's squad mates in Afghanistan had learned to recognize. The calm before a very particular type of storm. "No?" Oliver pressed the money harder against Rupert's closed lips. "Still playing the obedient toy soldier? Let's see how far that discipline really goes." He began to push the roll with more force, his fingers brushing against Rupert's mouth in a gesture that crossed from provocation into assault. "Open your mouth, you overpaid statue. Take the money. Take it like the—" What happened next occurred too quickly for most of the crowd to fully process. One moment, Rupert was standing perfectly still, enduring Oliver's escalating harassment. The next, everything changed. Rupert moved with the explosive speed of a combat veteran. His hand shot up and seized Oliver's wrist with such sudden force that the young man didn't even have time to gasp. The ceremonial rifle, despite its weight, was secured in Rupert's other hand with practiced ease. Years of muscle memory from close-quarters combat training took over as he executed a perfect wrist lock, twisting Oliver's arm at precisely the angle needed to cause maximum compliance with minimum injury. Oliver's knees buckled, partly from pain, mostly from shock. His face registered utter disbelief as he found himself being driven to the ground with methodical precision. Notes scattered from his hand, fluttering around them like expensive confetti. "What the—" Oliver began, but his protest was cut short as his back hit the pavement with a solid thud, driving the air from his lungs. Rupert maintained the wrist lock with one hand while retrieving the rolled bills from where they'd fallen. His movements were economical, unhurried, almost surgical in their precision. The years in Afghanistan had taught him to control adrenaline, to harness rather than succumb to it. That control was evident now as he knelt beside the struggling Oliver, his face still remarkably composed despite having broken the sacred protocol of his position. £8,270, Rupert stated, his voice carrying an edge like finely honed steel. "That's what you distributed across my uniform. An impressive sum." He held the rolled bills before Oliver's wide eyes, "but not nearly enough to purchase what you were attempting to buy." Oliver tried to speak, but Rupert applied pressure to the wrist lock, sending pain up the young man's arm that silenced him. "Before I stood guard at this palace," Rupert continued, "I stood guard over something far more important. The lives of my fellow soldiers in combat zones where people like you would never dare to tread." The crowd had fallen silent, captivated. The veteran stood nearby, his face showing grim approval. "I've been shot at by Taliban fighters who showed more respect than you. I've interrogated prisoners who demonstrated better understanding of boundaries." Rupert's grip remained firm as Oliver squirmed beneath him. "For 18 months, I've stood at this post in all weather, enduring tourists who treat me like a curiosity. I've maintained my composure because that's what duty requires." With his free hand, Rupert began collecting the scattered bills, never loosening his hold on Oliver. "But understand something about the men who wear this uniform." He leaned closer. "We're not statues. We're not decorations. We're soldiers who have placed ourselves under the most rigorous discipline out of respect for tradition, for country, for something larger than ourselves." Oliver had stopped struggling, his face pale with the dawning comprehension that he had catastrophically misjudged the situation. "The protocol that keeps us standing still isn't weakness," Rupert continued. "It's strength, the kind you cannot comprehend." He held up the roll of bills. "And it cannot be purchased, not for £8,000, not for 8 million. With deliberate movements, Rupert brought the currency to Oliver's mouth. Since you were so intent on putting this in my mouth, perhaps you'd like to experience it yourself." With methodical pressure, he pushed the rolled bills between Oliver's lips. "Consider it a lesson in consumption. You've spent your life consuming whatever you wanted. Today, you'll consume the consequences of your actions." Oliver choked as the bills entered his mouth, his eyes wide with humiliation. The symbolic force of having his own money stuffed back at him was overwhelming. "The taste of entitlement," Rupert observed. "Not pleasant, is it? Nothing but paper and ink, yet you've built your identity around it." He pushed until half the roll was lodged in Oliver's mouth. "That feeling, the helplessness, the indignity, is what you were attempting to purchase from me." The crowd had begun to murmur, some shocked, others with a sense of justice being served. "I could face disciplinary action for this," Rupert acknowledged, "but some lessons must be taught." He leaned closer. "I was reassigned to ceremonial duty because I sometimes went too far with enemies. Consider yourself fortunate that today I've shown restraint." With a final adjustment to ensure the money wouldn't cause choking, Rupert released the wrist lock and stood in one fluid motion. He retrieved his ceremonial rifle and addressed the stunned crowd. "My apologies for the disruption," he said. "This is not representative of the conduct visitors should expect at Her Majesty's residences." His eyes swept over them with quiet dignity. Some provocations cannot go unanswered, even in the face of protocol. Two palace security officers rushed to the scene, their expressions shifting from alarm to confusion as they took in the bizarre tableau. A young man sprawled with currency protruding from his mouth, a royal guard standing over him, and tourists looking more appreciative than alarmed. "Staff Sergeant Allerton," one security officer began, recognizing Rupert. "What's happened here?" "Attempted bribery progressing to assault, sir," Rupert reported crisply. "The individual attempted to force currency into my mouth after violating boundaries. I responded with measured force to neutralize the threat." The officers exchanged glances, then looked at Oliver, who was spitting out soggy pieces of currency, his face burning with humiliation. "We'll need statements," the senior officer said, "and there will likely be an inquiry." "Understood, sir," Rupert nodded. "I accept full responsibility for breaking protocol." The veteran stepped forward. "I witnessed the entire incident," he said. "This young man's behaviour was beyond the pale. The guard showed remarkable restraint." As Oliver was helped to his feet, he found his voice. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" he sputtered. "He'll have your job for this. He'll have this palace shut down." Rupert regarded him without emotion. "I've faced the Taliban, sir. Your father doesn't frighten me." He turned to the officers. "I'll provide my statement when required. For now, if permitted, I'll return to my post." With that, Rupert squared his shoulders, adjusted his bearskin cap, and marched back to his position. The only evidence of the incident was a slight disarrangement of his uniform and the scattered currency, reminders that beneath the ceremonial exterior stood a man of discipline and consequence. As Oliver was escorted away, still sputtering threats, the crowd began to disperse. But many lingered, watching with newfound respect as Rupert resumed his stance, once again the perfect image of the royal guard, motionless, vigilant, and now understood. Have you ever witnessed someone trying to buy respect instead of earning it? What would you have done in Rupert's position when faced with such blatant disrespect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this story. If you enjoyed this tale of respect earned the hard way, hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. Found this satisfying? Share it with someone who appreciates stories of justice served. Our previous videos are appearing on your screen right now. Check them out next. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another brand new story.